What's going on there, YouTube, and welcome back to another comic book video. Okay, guys, so we are going to cover a two-part story arc that gave us the return of Jean Grey. After covering the Mutant Massacre, I realized that there were a lot of storylines that kind of led into the actual crossover event, starting with the idea of Jean Grey coming back to life, which then led into X Factor. Now remember, when it came to Jean Grey, she had died back in the Dark Phoenix Saga, and she had been dead for a good while up to the point of this two-part story arc. Now, when it comes to her return, it didn't take place in X-Men comics. Matter of fact, it took place in Avenger comics and also Fantastic Four. And those two books right there kind of brought her back but established what exactly happened to her, and then it led into X Factor. And so getting into the first chapter for today's video, we have to jump over to Avengers number 263. Now when we do, we pick up with a group known as the Enclave. Now the Enclave was very important in the early days of Marvel Comics. And the reason why, because their main goal was to create the perfect race of humans. But one of their early creations was, well, Adam Warlock. Now, I'm not going to sit down and try to dive more into this group or Adam Warlock. Just know that they're going to be used to begin the process of the return of Jean Grey. Now, when it comes to the Enclave, they're trying to get out of New York because they're wanted by the police. And they're trying to leave by plane, but unfortunately, they need clearance from the airport to take off. The problem is, they don't get that clearance, and so they're just sitting ducks. And the reason why they don't get the clearance is because the airport had already called the police. And when the police arrive, of course, you have the Enclave freak out and try to leave the airport. The problem is, though, while trying to take off, they have an accident and they crash into the waters near the airport. Now, we also kind of find out there was some kind of special container where every single member of the Enclave spoke very highly about the container, but we have no idea what is inside the container. Either way, though, when they do crash into the waters near the airport, the container was on the plane with them. And so once you have police officers try to get close to the waters to see if everyone is okay, a huge amount of energy just blasts right out of the water. And we have to believe it came from the container. But the question is, what or who is inside that container? Now, when we jump over to the Avengers are having their own kind of problems. And the reason why? Because Namor is joining the Avengers. Now, the reason why that is a problem, because when it comes to America and Atlantis, they're not on good terms with one another. But on top of that, when it comes to Namor, he's an anti-hero. And so some people in the government are not very happy about the idea of an anti-hero joining the team. But on top of that, the team is also trying to adjust to Namor being on the team, because Namor is a very cocky character. He believes that he's the best thing on the entire planet. He also believes that he has the right to do almost anything he wants to do. And so because of that, the team is trying their best to adjust to him. Now, we do have Wasp, Captain America, Captain Marvel, Hercules, and also Wasp on the team around this point in time in Marvel Comics. Now, we do shift our focus over to Monica Rambeau. And the reason why, because when it comes to Monica Rambeau, she was the Captain Marvel of the team around this time. But when it comes to her, she does re-establish the idea of the Avengers adjusting to Namor being on the team. Now, she does tell us that she heard a lot of stories about Namor, and those stories are really not great stories at all. And so it does bring in some concern about Namor being on the team. Now, with all that being said, she does see the same kind of energy blast we saw earlier coming from the airport. And so she flies over there to figure out what in the world is going on. Now, when she does arrive, she is confronted by a police officer that does give her some information about what happened here, that they were able to capture the Enclave only because the Enclave had crashed their plane. Now, here's the thing, because you have the officer say, when we got close to the plane crash, we did see a huge blast of energy, and we knew it must have came from the Enclave cargo. And so I went ahead and sent in a team of divers to retrieve the cargo to figure out what in the world they were holding on to on their plane. Except as soon as he says that, his divers are shot out of the waters back near him and Monica Rambeau. And you have the divers tell him, hey man, I have no idea what in the world is inside that container, but it was able to shoot us away from it out of the waters near you. Like somebody is trapped in there, but that somebody has powers. Now, you do have Monica Rambeau believe that she should be able to get closer to the actual capsule because, one, she has powers, and two, the way her powers actually work. Now, she does get closer than the divers did, but of course, as soon as she does get close enough, whoever is inside the actual capsule, they begin to talk to her saying, go away, leave me alone. I don't want any kind of help at all. Now, Monica is like, no, I am going to get closer. But that was her big mistake, because as soon as she does take one more step, again, whoever is inside the actual capsule begin to put a force field around them, and it sends Monica Rambeau flying back. And that tells her to call in her team, to call in the Avengers. Now, when the rest of the Avengers arrive, you do have the rest of the Avengers mention the idea that they should be very careful when it comes to going near the capsule, not because of what happened to Captain Marvel and those divers earlier, really more because of the Enclave. Because again, the Enclave had created some powerful beings in the past. For example, Adam Warlock. And so they're saying, listen, we have no idea what in the world could possibly be inside that actual capsule. And so we should be very careful. Now, of course, you do have most of the team saying that, but not Namor. Namor feels like, you know what? I'm so powerful, I'm so cool. Is him again showing his cocky side, that he believes that he'll be able to handle whatever could be inside the actual capsule. And so he goes underwater to get near the capsule. But just like Captain Marvel, just like the divers, he gets sent back flying. And right there kind of humbles him down a tad bit to say, listen man, not everything can be handled so easily by just you using your brute strength. Either way, you do have the Avengers try to think of something else to do as a way to get closer to the actual capsule. Now, when it comes to Captain Marvel, she got word that one of the members of the Enclave is awake right now in the hospital. So she leaves to talk to him to hopefully get a better idea of what in the world could possibly be inside. And so when Captain Marvel arrives at the hospital and she does go towards one of the members of the Enclave, he tells her, hey, listen, I have no idea what you are talking about, but when it comes to that capsule, that was not us. Matter of fact, we found it somewhere and we decided to go ahead and take it to see what it could possibly be. But when it came to that capsule, we are not the ones who had created it. And so when it comes to Captain Marvel, she realized, okay, if the Enclave did not make whatever could be inside the capsule, then where in the world did it come from? But on top of that, what in the world is possibly inside of it? Now we do jump back over to the rest of the Avengers. Now when we do, we see the rest of the Avengers trying their best to get closer and closer to the capsule. Now, just like earlier when it came to Monica Rambeau and also the divers, when it comes to the Avengers who are trying to get close to the capsule, they get sent back flying the other direction. Now, Here's the thing though, because when they got close enough, they began to hear a voice in their head. And that voice in their head is coming from somebody who is most likely trapped inside the capsule. Now, at first, the voice in their head is saying, please leave me alone. I don't want to hurt you, go away. But luckily, with Wasp being there, they are able to communicate with the person inside the capsule to say, hey, we are here to help you. We are not here to hurt you. Please let us help you out. And the person inside the container says, fine, you can help me out. But once you have the person inside the container agree, the outer shell of the capsule goes away. And now we have this glass shell, but unfortunately our heroes cannot look inside of it to see who in the world could most likely be trapped inside the capsule. Either way, you had the Avengers say, now we are able to get close to it, let's go ahead and grab it and take it back over to Avengers Mansion. Now, once you have the Avengers arrive back to Avengers Mansion, well, you would think they'll have time to sit down, try to figure out how to open up the container, but to figure out who could also be inside the container. But the problem is, they're called away for another mission. And so now, the idea of figuring out who could most likely be inside the container will have to wait later on. Now, as soon as the Avengers leave, the capsule does clear up a tad bit where you are able to look inside of it. And we see Jean Grey. And Jean Grey is calling out for Scott. And like I said earlier, when it came to Jean Grey, she died back in the Dark Phoenix Saga. And so we're very confused about the idea of how in the world is she alive again. But on top of that, how will she feel when she finds out the man she loves that she's calling out for has moved on and married Madeline Pryor? Now, we do pick up with Fantastic Four number 286, where we do pick up with the Fantastic Four on their way back home to Earth from one of their many adventures. Now, with that being said, we do pick up with, of course, the Fantastic Four on their spaceship, and this is where I do want to mention that something is a tad bit different when it comes to the Fantastic Four. And what I mean by that is, around this point in time, Ben Grimm was not part of the team anymore, because this took place after Secret Wars. And when it came to Ben Grimm, he had decided to stay on Battleworld for his own personal reasons. And so that left room for somebody to take up his spot. And of course, that became She-Hulk. Now, with that being said, when it came to the Fantastic Four trying to get back home to Earth, they do call over to the JFK airport. Now, you do have the JFK airport say, no, you are not allowed to land your spaceship here. You're going to have to go somewhere else. Now, when it comes to the Fantastic Four, they're wondering what in the world happened at the JFK. And we already know what happened because of the previous chapter. And so they're saying, if the Avengers were involved in some kind of incident, maybe we should stop by their base and see what in the world they got going on. And so they land their spaceship at another airport and then take a taxi over to Avengers Mansion. Now, when they do arrive at the mansion, you do have Steve Rogers being able to catch up the Fantastic Four about what in the world is currently going on. Now, after doing that, you did have Reed Richards try to get close to the same container we saw in the previous chapter. But just like in the previous chapter, when somebody gets too close to the container, well, they get sent back flying the other direction. Right now, you have Reed Richards going the other direction. Now, luckily, Susan was able to use her powers to catch her husband. But do you have Reed say, hey, you know what? You have the ability to make things go invisible. So why not use your abilities right now to give us a look on what in the world is going on inside this container? And so once she is able to use her abilities, well, that is when you have everybody in the room get a clear look at Jean Grey. But here's the thing, nobody recognized her at all. And the reason why, because she has been dead for a good period of time. And so to them, it's just some random redhead who is currently trapped inside some kind of container. But the question is right now, how in the world are they going to break it open to free her from this container? Now, some hours do pass by, but unfortunately, the Fantastic Four and the Avengers are not lucky enough to find a way to break open the actual container. Now, when it came to Jarvis, when he does walk into the room, that is when things begin to get a tad bit crazy. And what I mean by that is everything in the room begins to move around all over the place. Of course, this is Jean Grey telekinesis powers going haywire. But of course, you do have our heroes realize that this time it's not the actual container that has everybody moving, it's actually the woman inside the container, Jean Grey. Now, after a while, you did have Jean Grey finally being able to break free from her container. Now, once you have Jean Grey being able to break free, she does kind of give us the idea of what's the last thing she truly remembers. And we kind of find out the last thing she remembers was fighting alongside Cyclops and the new X-Men team against Stephen Lang and his X-Sentinels. And that took place right after we had X-Men New Genesis, where you basically had the new X-Men team come in with Storm, Wolverine, Nightcrawler, Colossus, and some other characters as well. Either way, the last thing she remembers was fighting against them. And so when she breaks free, she believes that one, she's still fighting against them, but two, the Avengers and the Fantastic Four are X-Sentinels, because the X-Sentinels were just robots that looked like the X-Men. And so she currently believed that Stephen Lang made more of them to look like the Avengers and also the Fantastic Four. Now, when it comes to Reed Richards, he's able to tell her, no, I am not no kind of sentinel, neither is my wife, nor anyone else in the room at all. We are actually real people. Now, at first, she does not believe them, but honestly, she has the right not to believe them because those robots were very real. And so if that's the last thing she remembers, then of course, it's going to be hard for her to believe that they are not really robots. Now, once she's able to realize that, okay, the Fantastic Four are not robots, even the Avengers are not robots either, that these are real people, she realized that she most likely died or something happened to her for a good period of time. Now, you do have our heroes tell her, you died. And matter of fact, the last time we heard about you, Jean Grey, you died, you became the Phoenix. And she's wondering what in the world they are talking about when it comes to the idea of her being the Phoenix. Now, once she realized that how long she's been dead, the first thing she wants to do is go back to the X-Men. But the problem is, she can't do that. And the reason why, because when it comes to the X-Men around this point in time, Charles Xavier stepped down as the headmaster of the school, and Magneto took up his spot as the headmaster of the school. And so when it comes to the rest of the heroes in the Marvel Universe, they look at the X-Men as, you know, technically bad guys now, because Magneto was a bad guy at first. And even though he's now good, they're like, no, we know that he is bad. And if the X-Men are working with him, that means they are also bad as well. And Jean Grey cannot believe that the X-Men are working with Magneto, because again, the last time she saw him, he was an evil mutant. Now, she wants to go back home, but Reed says no. And the reason why, because she died. And if she goes home and runs into her family, that kind of shock could do a lot of damage mentally to her family. But again, it's Susan saying, no, Reed, she has the right to go back home to her family, to at least see somebody that she actually loves. Now, we do jump over to Jean Grey and some heroes heading over to her parents' house. Now, when they do arrive, it does give us a funny moment where you have Hercules break open the front door to see if anybody's at home. And of course, nobody's at home, but it's kind of like, hey, Hercules, there was a better way to figure out if anyone was at home. But with that being said, once you do have Jean Grey and other heroes go inside her house, her parents' house, they do find a globe. Now, this globe was given to her parents back in the Dark Phoenix Saga, I want to say. I forgot what issue it actually was, but this globe was given to them to kind of help them remember their daughter, Jean Grey. And this globe contains all the memories of Jean Grey. Now, when it comes to the globe, Reed believes that if Jean Grey is able to use the globe to kind of access her past memories, she'll remember what exactly happened to her when it came to her turning into the Phoenix, or possibly not turning into the Phoenix. And so we have to jump back over to Uncanny X-Men number 101. And the reason why, because this is where we get the huge retcon for that storyline. Because in that book right there, the X-Men were trying to leave the space station to get back to Earth by using a spaceship. The problem was, though, somebody had to be the pilot. And the problem was, though, if you were going to be the pilot, you're going to fight against radiation while everybody else would be in the back of the spaceship in some kind of chamber that can protect them from the radiation. And so it all came down to Jean Grey because she could use her powers to protect herself. Now, we were told in that storyline when it came to the radiation, even though she had her powers to protect her, the radiation was just too much for her to fight against. And so we were left to believe that even though she was able to get the spaceship back to Earth, once it crashed, we were left to believe she died, but she came back to life as the Phoenix. But that is not the case at all, because we kind of find out exactly what happened. Because she did cry out for help, but nobody could hear her cry except for the Phoenix Force. Now, when the Phoenix Force arrived, it wanted to help Jean Grey out, but the only way to do that was to take an actual form of Jean Grey. And so you had the Phoenix Force ask Jean Grey, hey, let me take over your spot here. Let me help protect the X-Men. But for me to do that, they have to believe that I was you. But on top of that, I have to take a form of you. Now, when it comes to your body, because you did fight against the radiation for so long, your body needs time to heal. So what I'm going to do for you is put your body inside a container at the bottom of the ocean or the waters or wherever they were crashed at to give you time to heal up. And while you're healing up, I'll become you, Jean Grey, and I'll take your place on the X-Men. And so that explains how that Jean Grey was technically able to get the spaceship all the way back over to Earth because the Phoenix finished the job. But she also made sure to put Jean Grey's body inside that capsule to help heal her body, to help her recover. But then it's kind of like, okay, but what happened when it came to the Dark Phoenix Saga? And so we learned that when it came to the Phoenix, when it did copy Jean Grey, it wasn't just physically, it was also mentally as well. Because when it came to the Phoenix, it was trying to replace Jean Grey while Jean Grey was inside that cocoon healing up after dealing with radiation. And that was the downfall of the Phoenix, because when it did copy Jean Grey, like I said, not physically but also mentally as well, it gained human emotions. And the Phoenix was not used to that at all. And so because of that, it led into the Dark Phoenix Saga, because the emotions of Jean Grey was fighting against the emotions of, well, the Phoenix. It was the emotions of Jean Grey that was able to overcome the emotions of the Phoenix, which led to what we believed was the death of Jean Grey, but really more of the emotions of Jean Grey shutting down the emotions of the Phoenix to make sure the universe is actually safe once again. And so now you have Jean Grey realize what happened to her. The question is, where does she go next? And so that is when you have Jean Grey wonder what to do next. Where can she go? She's kind of like, do I go for my family? Do I go for my friends? But if I do, will I be up to actually explaining what happened to me? And so while she's trying to process what could be her next move, well, then Reed says, you know what? I know who I can call. And that leads into X Factor number 1. And so this is where we are going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see y'all next time. Later.